Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we'll be playing with watercolors. So here we go. Here's everything that I'll be using to make today's card. I'm going to start out with this stamp set from Woodware. It's a beautiful floral, and I'll be using this sentiment as well, wishing you the happiest of birthdays. And I have an infinity die set from Hero Arts that I'll be using to cut out a border, which I'll show you. I have a piece of watercolor that I cut a little larger than I need so I could trim down, a piece of gold foil cardstock, as well as my card base. And I'll be using my Misty. And I have a couple of water brushes here. One is thick and one is a little thinner, finer for, fine detail. And these are the colors I'll be using. It's cadmium red, and these are from Bria Reese, violet, ocean green, and lake blue. Those are the colors I'll be using. I'll also be using embossing powder in gold and my Versamark, as well as a stamp block for my sentiment, some water, my anti-static tool, of course. My heating tool is on the left, and a microfiber towel. So let's get started. So I'm going to put my watercolor paper in the center of my Misty, and I'm going to take my stamp, and I'm going to spend a little time trying to figure out where I want it. I know I definitely want it on the bottom of the card, but I also know that I'll be trimming some of the cards, so I end up moving it over to the right, so I have some room to cut on the left. So I'm happy with that placement, and I use my anti-static tool, of course, all over the card, and then I use my Versamark. And I end up stamping this 3 times because the watercolor paper is textured. It's what they call, I guess, toothy is the term. It's not smooth, so I wanted to make sure that I got a really good impression on it so it would emboss really nicely. So there we go. And now we're going to go ahead and put some gold embossing powder on that. And I'm getting much better at not making such a huge mess with my embossing powder, so I am very proud. It went from a love-hate relationship to I'm just loving it right now. Okay, so we're going to heat that up and melt all that gold goodness. It's so cool when it's melting. It's hard for you to see in the camera because my lights are so bright, but seriously, I love watching this stuff melt. So pretty. Okay, so that turned out great. And then we're gonna move on to watercolor. Fingers crossed. This is definitely a medium that I don't use often at all. I think I've only ever really done watercolor once before. So I'm not well versed. I'm not a pro by any means. But what I did was I started by putting the water down first on the leafy areas and then picking up some color and putting it down. And I quickly realized it was just a little bit too washed out for me. I mean, this is watercolor and I do want it to look like watercolor, but I wanted the color to be just a tad bit more vibrant. So then I just started going straight into the color without placing water down first and putting the color down, and I was happy with that. So I did all the leaves first with the green color, and the embossing is great because it's a great guideline. It kind of keeps everything on the inside. So for a beginner like me, that it really helped to keep the color where I wanted it, the placement. So here I'm going to go in with the red. Now this was one of the first times, and there are many times in this card where I feel like, oh no, I ruined it. But with this color, it was just way too concentrated. So I was a little concerned that I, might have made a boo-boo. But then I quickly realized that the more I was moving it around without picking up any more color, it started kind of fading out. And I liked that effect. It was kind of just naturally giving me highlights and shadowing without me doing very much work at all. So I kept going with that. I would just pick up some color, some concentrated color, and do the outside petals of each rose. And then with whatever was left on my brush, I just kept moving that around towards the center and it would just get lighter and lighter and lighter. So it worked out really, really well. It's a little difficult to see again because of my lights, but I will show you once it's done. I'll show you a little close up, and I also have pictures at the end, of course, so that you can see how everything kind of turned out. But this was a happy little accident. I was happy that I figured this out and didn't give up on it once I placed that color down. And so yeah, so I just keep doing that. Like I said, I dip in and get concentrated for the outside petals, and then once I'm working on the inside, I don't use any more paint. I just let it kind of fade out. And that was it. That was quick and simple. You can kind of see the shading there a little bit better. It's darker around the edges and then lighter on the inside petals. So I was happy with that. It's not perfect, guys. I know I'm not a watercolorist, but I'm actually happy with that. So now we're gonna get ready to work on the background. And this is now the next time that I thought I ruined this card. So I wanted the background to be blues and purples. And so I chose these two colors, and I decided to use the big water brush and put water down first because I wanted it to have a little movement as I place the color down. That was not happening, and I'm sure it's user error, but I kind of panicked a little bit and I said, oh no, I definitely ruined it this time. But I didn't stop, I didn't quit, I kept going. And I was also very careful to make sure that I got in between all the leaves and the petals, anywhere where there was white watercolor paper. I wanted to get some color in there. I wanted the whole thing to be covered in color. So I probably should have used my thin watercolor brush, but yeah, I didn't. I just struggled and got in between with this big brush. Guys, you're probably going to watch this and be like, no, Millie, there's so many different things you could have done that would have made it easier. But hey, leave those tips below. I'm learning as I go along. And yeah, so I go and just finish up the background and start placing blue, in certain areas and purple in others. And ultimately, I was kind of happy with how it came out. It definitely looked very watercolor-like, so I was okay with it. So I'm just going to clean up here, and I'm going to let that dry on the side and work with these dies. I took the two largest dies, and I'll be cutting it off camera because my Gemini Junior just doesn't fit in frame. So I put these two frames together, and I'm going to cut the gold foil cardstock out of this, and it's going to give me a trim that I'm going to use on the card at the end. So we're about to see where I struggle yet again, thinking, oh no, something's wrong. And at the moment, I couldn't figure out what it was. And this is where I cut down my panel down to size. And I thought I cut it down to 4 by 5 1/4. But I didn't. I cut it down 4 by 5 1/2. And that's why I was struggling with the trim when I'm sizing it up here. I'm like, "Oh, something's off. It's just not right." But then I figured, I'll figure it out later because this is pretty much the last step in my card. So I figured I would just move on to the sentiment and I'll deal with that later. So I placed my sentiment where I want it on the top left-hand corner, and I left some space around because I wanted the trim, the gold trim, to go there. So I'm using my heating tool just to make sure that it's completely dry because I will be embossing my sentiment. So I dried it up and I used my anti-static tool and my Versamark, and then I just stamped down my sentiment right where I wanted it. Perfect. Now I'm going to place some of that gold foil on it and heat it up, and this worked out well. I didn't get gold foil, I'm sorry, the gold embossing powder everywhere, so that was perfect. Here we go, and now I'm going to heat that up. Awesome. And now here we go. This is when I discover I'm going to work on my card base now. I'm going to fold it up and use my bone folder to make a nice crisp edge. And then this is when I realized, oh no, I didn't cut it right because I went to place my card base and there's no edge around the top or bottom. So then I was like, oh, I took my ruler and I measured it real quick, and I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know if I cut the card base or the card panel wrong, but I discovered it was the panel. So I took off another little 1/4 inch there, and it gave me a perfect border. So I'm going to use my ATG gun and put a ton of tape. And again, this is textured and also slightly warped because of the watercoloring. So I use the ATG as well as my glitter glue all over, so that it could really stick down well. So I place it, leaving that little edging all the way around, and that edging is what I'm going to cover up with the foil. It was a little finicky, because it's so thin, but I have some tiny score tape here, so I just put a strip all around each edge. It was a perfect size for it. So I put a piece all along from end to end so that it has some good coverage with the tape. You all know that that's one of my pet peeves. I panic that things are just gonna fall apart in the mail if I send these out. So I want to make sure I have good coverage of tape. There we go. And then I start by taking out one of the bottom edges. I kind of end up going a little off camera here, but that's only because I'm bringing it close to me so that I can see what I'm doing. But I took off the one edge and I was going to place it down, and then I decided, no, let me pick up the two side edges a little bit, so that they don't get, I'm not trying to pull away that backing off of the tape with it down. So I put corner to corner, press it down in the center, just line it up, and then I could just pull as I go, and I push down so that it's nice and even all along the edges. So yeah, this was a little finicky. I like ultimately the final look of it all, and I like the idea of having the gold edge, but it was a little tough to work with for me. But I did it. I managed. And here I'm sorry about my head. I'm just trying to get a close look. And that's it, guys. There's the card. Thank you for taking this journey with me. I hope you guys like it. This is my, one of my first times working with watercolor, but I'm happy with it. And I have some close-ups and some pictures to show you at the end. And as usual, if you're not subscribed, please do so. If you have subscribed, thank you so much. And as you already know, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.